See, I was very fortunate enough to have an uncle in this business, Mr. Kamal Nathani. He was working in Delhi as an ad filmmaker and also was producing shows for LTV, which is again actually, so there is a karmic connection that I have with Z, because उस ज़माने में in '94 there was a show called Sansani, which these were episodic one-hour stories of suspense and passionate crimes. So that show is something that I was lucky enough to write with my dad, so for my uncle. So in a very, I mean, that I say it's a blessing that I didn't have to struggle or anything. I just had to, and I was 20 at that point in time. So I was very, it was a nice thing. I mean, one ended up writing about 15-20 stories for that show, and my dad would give me the germ, I would develop it, and that show seemed to have, I mean, it turned out pretty well, I think so. And then I completed my engineering. I did my electronics engineering ka degree I got from Father CRC in Bandra. There's a college called Father Concesor. So that was, after that I did a campus job, and but then I realized that I always by heart obviously lay in writing and creating shows and creating formats, and there was this desire to actually be a writer first and foremost. So I ended up joining my uncle's company for 3 years. I did a lot of non-fiction, fiction as an assistant. And I also tried writing stuff, but I was still obviously learning, and there was nothing. I directed also non-fiction links for a travel show. So I also got exposure on certain other. I was also assisting in a game show, a music game show. So I was also exposed to not just fiction formats but also non-fiction formats. And then in '99 I was lucky enough to come back to Bombay and join Nimbus, and there I was fortunate enough to work with Mr. Akash Khurana and Mr. Sudhir Mishra, because these two gentlemen were associated with Nimbus at that point in time, and both of them, there were certain TV shows, there were certain fiction shows for Doordarshan that were being made at that point in time, and I was lucky enough to write those shows. I was given the opportunity by both these gentlemen for different shows to write. So I also became a screenplay writer during that course of time. There was a show called Kahani Saath Feron Ki, and there was a show called Agni, and there was another show called Shakti. These were all on DD National, and then there was another show which was commissioned by Channel 9. Channel 9, DD Metro had an alliance at that point, and so there was a show called Kuch Ret Kuch Pani, which I wrote. So in those 3 years I wrote some 6 to 7 shows, and I was not only fortunate enough to be the associate creative director on these shows, in the sense that I would be in charge of the casting, and then eventually I became, they called me senior creative director. Over 4 years or 3.5 years that I spent in Nimbus, I was not only being able to write, but I was also directly creative line person in terms of casting, in terms of briefing the director, in terms of understanding which director needs to direct the show. So at a very early, in these early years of my career, I got a lot of correct mentoring, I would say, and I also got a lot of independence, so that I could make my mistakes. And I think some of these shows were Doordarshan shows, तो शायद वो एक ease भी रहता है कि आपको खुद ही पता चल जाता है कि अरे रेटिंग्स अगर नहीं आई तो आप ही रिस्पॉन्सिबल हैं उनके लिए। आपके बीच में ब्रॉडकास्टर जो है वो सिर्फ ओवरऑल क्वालिटी देखता है, वो ये जिस तरह से प्राइवेट सैटेलाइट चैनल्स हर चीज़ में डिसाइड करते हैं, विजन बनाते हैं, उस तरह से दूरदर्शन नहीं करता है, वो काफ़ी हद तक छोड़ देता है लोगों पे। तो वो चीज़, वो इंडिपेंडेंस मेरे लिए बहुत ज़रूरी थी। इन दोज अर्ली ईयर्स आई लर्न हाउ टू जस्ट वर्क इंडिपेंडेंटली with my vision and say that this is what, and of course I mean I would obviously take the advice and consent of a Sudhir or a Akash Khurana, and these people will tell me that, I mean, so that sort of worked for me. Then I joined UTV. For 4 years I was with them. UTV I did lots of shows for them. The entire afternoon band of Star Plus at that point, including Bhabhi, Shagun, all these shows. I was the senior creative director on those shows. I was also in charge of the storylines of these shows. So there was a writer working, there was Rajesh ji working with me at that point. So that was a brilliant association where we ended up doing some 1,100 episodes of a show called Bhabhi, which was which notched a lot of ratings on Star Plus in the afternoons. Shagun also worked for me. Then there were other shows also that I got associated with them in that period. Avinash IPS tha, Shararat tha, and then I was also fortunate enough to work with Diya and Tony Singh. I worked on creating a show called Left Right Left along with other colleagues of Sub TV and other people. And there were some brilliant writers on that project. I was the script head on the show, so I was leading that team, and I thought that show came out very well. I also did a show in English language for Z Cafe at that point in time. It was a show made with Indian actors but in spoken English. I was writing that show. Again, I was the creative director on that show. So that was a good time. It was called Bombay Talking. It was a spoof. I won't call it a spoof. It was a very interesting comical tribute, or rather a tribute in dark humor to some of the to what happens in Bollywood, and so that was a. But it had a lot of soap element as well, and so I was fortunate enough to get these opportunities. I also wrote a couple of rishtes for ZTV. I also wrote, there was this format called Aap Jo Bole Haan To Haan. Then there was an X Zone. I used to particularly love suspense and horror, so I was also. And thereafter, I was in 2007. I was given the opportunity by Ashwini in ZTV. Z was starting a new channel called Z Next, and at that point in time, Ashwini Yardley was heading programming for Z. She was also in charge of Z Next, and she called me in to head this new channel, Z Next. Then of course she moved on, and then thereafter Mr. Puneet Goenka was good enough to shift me from Z Next to ZTV, and then my journey in ZTV began. I was brought in as a creative director of fiction. I did a show called, I think the show that sort of gave me the confidence that I could also drive creatives from a broadcaster's end, was Agle Janam Mohe Bitiya Ki Jo, because that was my baby. I mean, literally, it was an idea that, of course, someone had presented, and we honed it inside. But the way it was written, the way it was designed, the way it was produced, the way it was directed, a lot of that confidence and a lot of that independence. I mean, I thank my bosses here that I got that independence, and I think that was a turning point for me. And then there was Rani Jhansi that happened later. Then there was Choti Bahu, which was a huge hit, and then there was 12/24 Karol Bagh, which was my idea. I wanted to always do a show set in a nuclear middle class family in Delhi, because I've lived quite a few years in Delhi, and somewhere I felt that girls in Delhi, especially growing up years of women in Delhi, I think there's a lot of contradiction in the way Delhi operates. At one end, you feel that there is so much for girls to do, and at the other end, there is the mindset of a trader community. There is a city that's also has a lot of there's a lot of intergenerational conflict that happens in that part of the world, just like any other part of the world. But there is a lot of I felt that Delhi provided that correct atmosphere, that correct Punjabi world in which I could show that at one end we are willing to let our girls grow up in a very liberated way, and at the other end we also want them to get married to men that we believe are our choices or whatever. So there was a lot of that story was again something which was very closer to my heart, and of growing up in Delhi in 2010. And then I was promoted to be the fiction head of this channel in 2.5 years back. That was again a very difficult time. One of my bosses, who had been very good, had moved to Sony, so it was a challenging time where I was directly in charge of a lot of things. That again, one commissioned a lot of shows, some wrong, some right, but interesting. There were interesting times. I have. I mean, there have been. We have been very. I mean, one of the good things of working for ZTV is that I have had a lot of creative freedom in terms of being able to do different things. Like, I mean, we've just launched a show called Fear Files, which is based on real stories, which is based on real incidents or real reported facts, and one is very it's kind of working for us right now. So that's been a recent success. That one is very. Today, in fact, we are launching a show called Rab Tha Sona Ishq, which is set in Punjab and London. And that again for me is a very interesting love story about today's generation, and especially today's generation that comes from smaller towns, that comes from a part of the world which is still, where they are still sort of hoping that they can. I mean, everybody dreams, but when you see an innocent small town dream, and when you see that dream evolve over a period of time, when you see those young people that sort of believe that they need a lot more exposure and they can. So in terms of love and in terms of identity and career, it's a very interesting journey for three young people that come from Punjab and then go to London in that show. So that's another interesting show, that's a germ that what we have sort of created. There's another show which is very, very close to my heart called Fir Subah Hogi, which is set in Bundelkhand. It's about this Bedia tribe and this community where girls have to dance to earn their money. They also get taken in as mistresses, stroke wives. They're called wives, but they're not wives, by these Thakurs. And it's this girl who decides to stand up against this tradition. She does fall in love with the Thakur, and thereafter what happens to her journey and how she sort of wins, or how she sort of all her trials and tribulations, and of her mother as well. I mean, it's a very fascinating mother-daughter tale according to me. Then we've also created this very interesting template in Hitler Didi, which is very, very different. It's about a very strong girl who is actually very sacrificing but extremely stern and difficult in the way she speaks. But at heart, she's one of the most fascinating heroines, the most giving, altruistic heroines that we have ever created.
Your father, you said, your uncle were already in this media.
My father was, my father was a struggling actor and a writer who came to Bombay to try and make it big, but because he wanted to support his family and did not want his family to go through any unstable phase or suffer because of his ambitions, he could never quit his job. He was working in LIC and he never quit that job. And somewhere along the way, he still tried writing with some people. He wrote a couple of things for a gentleman called Ramesh Meer, and he was able to write some. I think he also reached out to Yashraj at one point in time, but things didn't really work out for him as a writer. But what he did is something that really today makes me feel extremely grateful to him for my career, because at a very younger age he exposed me to cinema. He made me see Satyajit Ray, Mrinal Sen, Raj Kapoor, Guru Dutt, Charlie Chaplin, Billy Wilder, Alfred Hitchcock. So whether it was Hollywood, whether it was even Bicycle Thieves, to talk about the neo-realist Italian, then to talk about Charlie Chaplin, and to talk about the great mainstream makers like Raj Kapoor, Bimal Roy, Guru Dutt. So he was able to expose me and my brother at such a younger age, when we were just growing up in early 80s, to all this. Somewhere along the way, that teaching came very handy in terms of the grammar of writing, in terms of grammar of characterization, in terms of being able to understand how insightful writing, how writing that contextualizes what's happening in society, or what's happening in human relationships, or what's happening in personal interactions at any given point in time in any period, whether it's a societal viewpoint or whether it's the viewpoint of what happens in a very intimate family world. And despite doing engineering, There was a lot of insecurity in my parents at that point in time when I decided to chuck my engineering career. I was in a job in Delhi in a petrochemical software company for about 6 months, and then I decided to quit my job. So there was a complete period of uncertainty, insecurity. The amount of money that I was making in that job and the amount of money that I was making with my uncle was obviously, there was a huge difference. Here I was like an apprentice starting in TV, where I was paid some 3,000, 2,000 rupees, I think, something. So that strife, I think I appreciate my parents because they decided to let me take that chance, and I think that was what sort of has sort of been good for me.
So, Kate, you never felt the lack of formal training?
I did. I do. I still do. I still hope in my life that someday I'm able to. Although I would say that working with Sudhir Mishra and Akash Khurana, even though it was like for Sudhir, there were about 60-70 episodes of a show where he used to correct my screenplays. So I felt that that was one of the best times because he was so bang on, he was so insightful when he would tell me about characters or people or the way you structure a 21-minute screenplay, that I think that was amazing. Even with Mr. Khurana, the way he spoke on characters, the way he spoke on some Hollywood movies that I hadn't seen, and while we see, I do agree that when it comes to TV screenwriting, TV screenplay writing in daily soaps, we may have had opinions, we may have had a few people taking workshops, but yes, the manner in which we should be chronicling these decades, the last 2 decades of television, and sort of discussing how screenplay writing has changed or improved or not improved, either ways, that kind of analysis has happened very rarely. That kind of discussions have happened very rarely in public. So I don't think we are. I mean, sometimes when I do get called to sort of talk in colleges or about writing, one feels that I may be quoting a lot from personal experience, from my personal errors and mistakes that I might have made in writing. But I wish there was a far more scientific process that sort of at least explained, okay, if there has been a writing in the K era, then what kind of writing was that? What were the merits of it? How did they reflect? I mean, when I have ended up being a person who's actually telling writers what to do on various shows, I sometimes feel extremely handicapped. I sometimes feel, okay, is this too subjective a process? I know designing a scene is a very subjective process, and it's completely the domain of the writer, and it's a very individualistic sort of. But we've had very healthy discussions with very senior writers on this, in terms of being able to figure how an episode in a daily soap needs to be structured, how a scene needs to be designed, or how the pace or tempo of how a certain plot needs to unravel in a certain show needs to happen. And that learning, we keep sort of wondering whether it can ever be scientifically with examples chronicled for younger people. So that worry, obviously, I mean, I never got that in a very scientific way, but I did get that from Mr. Khurana and Mr. Mishra in my early years. And I think even when we were working with Star, when I was doing a lot of shows, I think some cases the people who headed the channel at that point in time had some interesting insight to give us in the telling of stories. So you learn along the way, obviously, and you keep hoping that in the future there is enough for younger people to draw from. And we are also, unfortunately or fortunately, in the first 3 decades maybe of TV writing. And I think over the years in the US, it's taken 8 or 9 decades of writing for television that's kind of gotten them to have so much of material and so much of skill. And that's why they have, in our case, when I just see a lot of TV that happened in mid-80s, and that too was a weekly format television that we were sort of conforming to. Somewhere from that weekly format to what has happened in dailies over the last 12 years or 13 years, you kind of feel that you need a lot more. I mean, there will be a lot more evolution that will happen over the next few years, that in the next 4-5 years, a lot of change that will be quicker for Indian TV. I mean, I've got a feeling that my gut tells me that what happened in the US television over 3-4 decades might happen here over just a decade, because we are viewers, and the exposure that we as a nation that's technologically also advancing at such a pace, I think even in terms of our exposure, the viewer exposure to styles of writing, to subtler writing, to writing that's more quirky and more intelligent, that exposure, I think as broadcasters we'll have to lead that. We'll have to hope that instead of just having a very spoon feeding mechanism, we'll have to sort of find, and I think we'll have to also find a lot of episodic, in the next few years what's also going to happen is that we will move away from dailies to some extent, not entirely. Even within dailies we'll have to give gratification at a more episodic level, instead of having these long drawn out plots that sort of appear hackneyed after a point in time. So I think these 1 hours have just begun. Crime Patrol has done very well for Sony. We are doing files. So these interesting true to life depiction wale 1 hours have now suddenly become big for us, big for the Indian GEC scene. But apart from that, even I think there is space for more sitcoms, more thrillers that are episodic in nature. Even within dailies, I think in Mrs. Kaushik ki Panch Bahu, there's this show that we're doing, which appears to most viewers as a Saas Bahu show, but for me it's not a Saas Bahu show. For me it's like a brilliant adventures of Mrs. Kaushik kind of format, where I believe every week or every 2 weeks we take this interesting plot and we take a family that's sort of coming together to battle unwanted guests, or to battle deviant tuition teachers, or to battle. So it's a perfect I wouldn't call it a complete sitcom, but I would call it a comedy, a perfect comedy for middle class, for families and middle class viewers. I think in a very it's a very intimate joint family setting, and so I even kind of find that format. We stumbled upon this format while doing it, so there was no science there, and again we realized that if your families are acceptable, nice, and they have been characterized and cast well, then you can play with what's happening to them. I mean, the audience is more ready for the bizarre, more ready for the fantastic, more ready for a lot more experiences, a lot more rasas that we haven't given them. हम करुणा रस दे देते हैं, हम दुख वाला रस बहुत दे देते हैं, but हम कई बार ह्यूमर, थ्रिल, फियर, ये चीज़ें कई बार आउटलैंडिश चीज़ें भी करो, लेकिन उनको थोड़ा इमेजिनेटिव तरीके से करो. तो वो चीज़, वो स्ट्रगल जो है राइटिंग के लेवल पे, फॉर्मेटिंग के लेवल पे, इंडियन GECs, इंडियन एंटरटेनमेंट चैनल्स के लिए बहुत बड़ी स्ट्रगल है. आई थिंक मतलब इन द नेक्स्ट 2 years a lot of, because कभी कभी ऐसा लगता है कि we have a lot more, we can actually again, you know, we can, there is a space for news channels, there's a space for a lot of other viewing, but we aren't doing as well as an all broadcasters put together as much as we can. I mean, there are a lot of urban viewers who don't endorse us, and there are a lot of viewers who do endorse us. But I mean, I would want the so-called intelligent viewer who goes to watch a film on multiplex also to start endorsing, watching stuff on GCs. So how do you sort of find that balance? How do you, a nation, a society which is so diverse in terms of its viewing spectrum, of course eventually you can have many more channels which cater to different kinds of target, but you also should have that one big channel that sort of tries and cuts across to the entire mass spectrum. I mean, how do you sort of, that challenge of always having the lowest common denominator and the highest common denominator to watch a program also remains one of the interesting sort of challenges for us. No, I think family audiences are still I mean, they are obviously watching us. Younger women are watching us. even men have started coming back to TV. I mean, when I say specifically for general entertainment channels, men were always watching soaps with their wives, but it's this very big myth that we have that women drive the remote control. I mean, of course they do, but I think men enjoy soaps equally. All, if not all, but at least some soaps, you would see a very specific skew where you would see the man enjoying the soap as much as the woman does in that sense. So of course men also want their quota of comedy, horror, suspense, and those rasas are also something that men could but what's very fascinating is that Fear Files is equally appealing to women. So even there was a myth that okay, horror is not going to be appealing to women maybe. So there are a lot of I think a lot of churning is happening in on the viewership scenario in the last 3-4 years. Television is becoming more, needs to be more credible in the way it's treated, in the way it's shot. Like there's been a lot more effort by all GCs to go and shoot in actual locations. So if you're doing a show which is set in Bihar, you will have to use that dialect, you will have to be very true to that culture. I think the audiences are more hungrier now because of their exposure to cinema from abroad and then better cinema even happening in our country right now. In TV too, we will have to take those cues and improve the quality of our writing and direction, improve the quality of production design. We tend to go into the same sets, we tend to design our sets in a similar fashion. So there's a lot more innovation that's required in production design, in shooting standards, treatment. So राइटिंग पे तो है ही, क्योंकि राइटिंग का तो रस एनीवे बहुत इवॉल्व जल्दी हो रहा है, तो वो डर तो महसूस होती है कि कितनी जल्दी हमारे लोग जो हैं और हमारे चैनल भी, ये रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी हमसे चैनल से भी आती है कि हम कितना ज़्यादा एक्सपेरिमेंट करने के लिए तैयार हैं, कितना ज़्यादा राइटर को फ्रीडम देने के लिए तैयार है और कितना ज़्यादा हम नए टैलेंट को आगे, because there's also that pipeline that needs to constantly be there, because they will be able to surprise you with the way they design a screenplay or with the way they design the unraveling of a plot. Some younger writers, because they would their reference points will not be maybe just our writing. So to be able to find that original style in younger writers is also a very big challenge for us, so that we can again give the viewer a different experience.
Does every TV channel have its own target audience?
See, at the end of the day, we are trying to, honestly speaking, they may end up forming their own TV audiences, but I think at the core of it, the crux of it, the truth is that you're trying to reach out to as many as possible. TV penetration has gone so hugely up in smaller towns that there was a phase in the middle where some channels, including ours, were suddenly very skewed to only rural stroke, semi-small town kind of. But I don't think that was just, I think if you have to be a complete channel, you should be able to cater to various kinds of mindsets. I mean, it's not just about geography I'm talking about mindset. The mindset could be a slightly evolved mindset, the mindset could be a mindset which has just gotten exposed to TV, which is, so, जो भी रस है और जो भी quality of writing है, उसमें हर तरह की audience को cater करने की क्षमता होनी चाहिए. Till we of course reach a point where we believe that our channel will cater to this kind of mindset, the multiplex mindset, or our channel will only cater to the bilkul parivarik mindset. So I think the broader key terms for all the GCs is family entertainment. We have to be able to create a show where the family is able to sit together and watch it, which is of course, क्योंकि TV अभी भी community viewing experience है, वो अभी भी बहुत पर्सनल एक्सपीरियंस नहीं है जो सिनेमा में हो जाता है. सिनेमा में आप फिर भी अपनी फैमिली के साथ नहीं जाएं, आप चाहें तो ना जाएं, आप फ्रेंड्स के साथ जा सकते हैं, आप किसी के साथ भी जा सकते हैं. आप अपने दादा दादी को, अगर कोई फिल्म है जो थोड़ी बोल्ड है तो आप ना भी चाहें तो ना ले जाएं, बच्चों को ना ले जाएं अगर आप चाहें तो अडल्ट. टीवी में वो मौका कम मिलता है, मतलब वो आपको, क्योंकि आपको फिर भी टीवी जो है आपके बेडरूम में है सीधा, तो आपका परिवार कोई भी ऑन करके देख सकता है. तो आप सिर्फ इतना कर सकते हो कि भाई अच्छा रात 11 बजे के बाद हम थोड़ा सा ऐसा कंटेंट दिखा सकते हैं जो बोल्ड हो, या हॉरर का ज़्यादा मापदंड बढ़ा सकते हैं, सस्पेंस का, हॉरर का, अडल्ट थीम्स में जा सकते हैं, लेकिन अदरवाइज आप उसके अलावा कुछ खास नहीं कर सकते. सो आई डोंट थिंक देयर इज़ एनी, आई वुड स्टिल से दैट GCs want to reach out to as many people as possible. The more the merrier. The lowest common denominator and the highest factor, all of them have to sort of ideally come together for us.
Do you have a social consciousness?
Yeah, I think in that sense it's very naturally embedded. I think one of the most interesting things that I learned when I came into Z, and I also sort of, I think my colleague Ajay Balwankar, who's also our head of all Hindi channel content, he also, both of us sort of, he's been a journalist. I have, I naturally, there is a certain tendency that like I would never get a woman to be slapped on there are certain basics, and I think Puneet himself, our promoter, CEO, he himself is extremely conscious about depiction of rape, about depiction of any crime against women. How are we going to portray that? He's extremely clear that we have to have, and I think it's also to do with culture. There's a lot of debate that constantly happens within our system on how culture needs to be protected, how it needs to still, how when families are sitting and watching a show together, to what extent will you pull, will you sort of, will you have a lovemaking scene that defies norms of will you have expletives on television? Now those are things that are very tricky. There can be a creative license given to certain things and there can't be. But I think we largely, of course, we follow the S&P code and whatever the IVF, and that goes without saying that. I mean, so in terms of even what you call as conventional popularity के मापदंड, कि आपने shows बनाए जो socially relevant थे, social causes को या women के depiction में नए आयाम create कर रहे थे, but at the same time वो popular भी हो रहे थे fortunately, क्योंकि वो नहीं तो आप पे वो, जैसे अगर आप बिल्कुल पॉपुलर ना करो तो फिर आपका बिजनेस मॉडल आपका ऑपरेट नहीं होगा. पॉपुलैरिटी जितने लोग आपको व्यू करते हैं उसके अनुसार ही बिजनेस मॉडल चलता है. तो उन दोनों चीज़ों को रखते हुए कि आप सिर्फ रेटिंग को मद्देनजर रखते हुए प्रोग्राम नहीं बना सकते. आपको प्रोग्राम में कोई दिल, कोई ऐसी चीज़ ढूंढनी पड़ेगी जो बहुत ज़्यादा पैशनेट करे उस टीम को, या जो टीम क्रिएट कर रही है वो इंस्पायर्ड होके काम करे, और फिर अपने आप नंबर्स और आते हैं पीछे.
So you do not have Wednesday TRP fevers?
No, I think that I will grudgingly admit that yes, we do get affected at times by numbers. Affected not in terms of our karmic journey. I mean, affected not in terms of the fact that अरे हमने कल स्टोरी बदलनी है, वो नहीं. वो एक चीज़ इवॉल्व हुई है. वो मैच्योरिटी एक चैनल में एक टीम को काफ़ी वक्त स्पेंड करने के बाद रियलाइज होता है कि नी जर्क रिएक्शंस और सिर्फ रेटिंग के लिए काम करने से तो कोई फ़ायदा नहीं होगा. आपको एक पैशन, एक स्टोरी क्रिएट करनी पड़ेगी किसी पैशन से, और उम्मीद करनी पड़ेगी कि उसकी ग्रामर ऑफ राइटिंग, उसकी कास्टिंग, उसकी ट्रीटमेंट, वो सब चीज़ों का मिश्रण ऐसा है कि लोग आपके साथ जुड़ जाए. अगर नहीं जुड़ रहे हैं, आप स्ट्रगल करिए, कहानी में करते रहिए, लेकिन आप कई बार क्या होता है उस स्ट्रगल में आप बेसिक DNA जो होता है आपकी कहानी का आप खो देते हैं. मैंने भी गलतियाँ की हैं. अगले जन्म में हमने एक लीप लिया था, वो गलती करी थी. करोल बाग में लास्ट में हमने ड्रामा का क्वेश्चन बहुत बढ़ा दिया, बहुत पॉपुलिस्ट कर दिया आखिरी के कुछ एपिसोड्स में. कई बार वो गलतियाँ होती हैं बिल्कुल जाहिर तौर पे कि आप डर जाते हैं, लेकिन आई थिंक हमने एज अ टीम लास्ट 2-2.5-3 साल में ये सीखा है कि DNA मत हिलाइए. जो एक शो जिस जर्म पे टिका हुआ था उसको हिलाते हैं तो सब कुछ हिल जाता है.
What do you look for in that writer? Do you, how does the equation work now?
So that's a very, very relevant question for anybody who sort of is a creative director or a fiction head or for any other. Because हमारे लिए सबसे बड़ी learning जो होती है, मेरी जो 3 साल की सबसे बड़ी learning है ये है कि मैं एज अ राइटर अगर दूसरे राइटर को बताऊंगा चीज़ें तो वो कभी भी सही नहीं होंगी. अगर मैं एज अ व्यूअर या एज अ प्रोग्रामर एक राइटर को इंडिपेंडेंट स्पिरिट से कहने दूं और करने दूं जो चीज़ें कहनी है, और एक बहुत ही कन्विंसिंग तरीका जो कि बहुत डिफ़िकल्ट है इवॉल्व करना ओवर अ पीरियड ऑफ टाइम से, अगर मैं एज अ कलीग उनको बता सकूं कि भैया ये यहाँ पे ऑब्जेक्टिव होकर आप देखिए कि कहानी अगर ऐसा सुनाते हैं तो ये मापदंड होंगे, ये इसका नज़रिया होगा, तो क्या व्यूअर किस तरह से रिएक्ट करेगा। तो वो एक बहुत बड़ा चैलेंज होता है कि एज अ राइटर मैं दूसरे राइटर को अगर मैं हावी हो जाऊँ उस पर, तो मैं तो फिजिकली तो लिख नहीं रहा, मैं किसी और से लिखवा रहा हूँ एक शो। तो वो बहुत ही, आई थिंक वो गलतियाँ हमने बहुत की हैं। मैंने कई बार लोगों को, मेरी टीम कई बार पूरे के पूरे लाइनअप देती है कई बार कह के कि नहीं हमें ठीक नहीं लगा आपका, हम ऐसा करना चाहते हैं। तो वो आज भी मेरी अपनी टीम से वो एक लड़ाई भी रहती है, और एक हमारे बाहर के राइटरों से भी गुजारिश होती है कि अपना कन्विक्शन रखिए, हमें एक कहानी बेचिए जिसमें आपने अपने स्किल, पैशन, कॉन्फिडेंस सब चीज़ों को रखते हुए कुछ चीज़ पेश करिए। अब उसमें इन्हेंसमेंट की गुंजाइश तो हमेशा रहेगी और उस पर डिस्कशन हो सकता है, लेकिन इस हद तक ना आ जाए आप कि हमारा राइटर जो है बैठ के आपकी राइटिंग करे, और वो चैलेंज हम दोनों की पार्टीज का है, एक की पार्टी का नहीं। तो दैट आई थिंक इज वन ऑफ द बिगेस्ट चैलेंजेस, दैट यू कांट बी राइटिंग somebody's, you can't be doing somebody else's job. Your job is to enhance. Your job is a very difficult job because it's almost like a human resource manager's job, that we are sort of understanding the strengths and the weaknesses and the quirks of another writer, another creator, and then adjusting with those quirks, with those things. And because it's at the end of the day an experience that no writer can claim कि यही तरीका है इस शो को लिखने का या इस स्क्रिप्ट को लिखने का। ये बहुत ही एक सिर्फ एक विजन चल पाता है। तो हम उस विजन में, या तो वो मेरा विजन है जिसमें कोई इंसान मेरे विजन को ट्रांसलेट कर रहा हो, या वो एक राइटर का विजन है जिसको मैं सिर्फ इन्हेंस करने की कोशिश कर रहा हूँ, बट आफ्टर अ पॉइंट में विड्रॉ कर रहा हूँ। तो ये जो मैच्योर रिलेशनशिप होता है एक दो तीन लोगों का जो क्रिएट करते हैं एक सब्जेक्ट, एक चैनल की टीम और एक वहाँ की राइटिंग टीम, जो वो कोलैबोरेशन बहुत फैसिनेटिंग, एंड आई थिंक वी आर इम्प्रूविंग इन दैट डायरेक्शन. वी हैव सॉर्ट ऑफ, आई थिंक आर recent projects that have worked also been appreciated by the viewers and generally even by the industry. Those are where I think I feel endorsed that maybe we are moving in a direction जहाँ एक राइटर दूसरे राइटर को बहुत मैच्योरिटी के साथ जो है, बहुत ही आई थिंक वो स्किल कह लीजिए, वो डिग्निटी कह लीजिए, वो वक्त के साथ आती है, वो थोड़ा उम्र के साथ भी आती है, और शायद गलतियों के साथ आती है बहुत सारी।
अगर चैनल आप नए राइटर्स को खोजते हैं
या नए राइटर्स को एट अ वेरी रॉ लेवल तो नहीं खोज पाए, वो तो मैं मानता हूँ कि मैं हमेशा इनफैक्ट कोशिश करता हूँ कि फेसबुक पे या कहीं पे कोई एक्टर तो बहुत रिक्वेस्ट भेज देते हैं, बाकी लोग भेज देते हैं स्ट्रगल करते हुए, लेकिन राइटर्स बहुत कम। व्हाट आई एम ट्राइंग टू डू सर राइट नाउ इज टू लुक एट पीपल हु मे हैव रिटन जस्ट अ फ्यू शोज या बहुत कम शोज लिखने के, तो वहाँ से मैं बड़ी कोशिश होती है पूरी कि हम लोग जैसे भी मतलब ये खैर बहुत बड़ा चैलेंज है हमारे, बहुत बड़ा, क्योंकि कई बार क्या होता है कि आप ये तक नहीं जानते कई बार कि मतलब कि स्टार में कोई एक शो चल रहा है। जैसे माई चैलेंज टू माई टीम एंड टू माई सेल्फ इज कि आपको जो शोज जो भी लिखना है आपको सबके नाम पता होना चाहिए, कि हमें पता होना चाहिए कि जो लोग जो भी काम कर रहे हैं आज की तारीख में टीवी में वो कौन है। एक तो पहले वही चैलेंज पूरा नहीं होता, कई बार आप यही नहीं जान पाते कि अरे यार ये शो एक नया बड़ा इंटरेस्टिंग लिखा है, ये तो इन्होंने तो हमारे कभी काम ही नहीं किया। तो वो एक चीज़ बहुत बड़ी चैलेंज है, जो वो इतनी बड़ी नहीं है बट वो भी है। आई मीन आई एम बिगनिंग फ्रॉम देयर एंड या बट आई वुड respect one thing that we do. I think one of the things that we do right is the fact that we try and read up everything that everybody emails. जैसे बहुत से राइटर्स डायरेक्ट मेल करते हैं, कई बार मुझे रश्मि मेरे कलीग्स हैं उनको मेल करते हैं, तो हम पढ़ते 100% है कि भले ही वो 8 पन्ने पढ़ने हैं 6 पन्ने पढ़ने हैं, वो जल्दी पढ़ लेते हैं ताकि ये जज कर सके कि भैया यहाँ पे कुछ दम है या नहीं है, मतलब इनको। तो दैट आई थिंक आई डू वेरी वेल. But yeah, in recent times we have now started working with people that we weren't working with before. But इससे पहले अक्सर ऐसा भी हुआ है कि आप 3 या 4 राइटरों में सिमट के रह जाते हो, कई आपके जो मेन शोज हैं वो आपके ही लोग जो आपको कॉन्फिडेंटली डिलीवर करते आए हैं अब तक, आप उन्हीं 5 या 6 नामों पे निर्भर करने लगते हो. वो आई थिंक चीज़ अभी बदल रही है। मैं कोशिश कर रहा हूँ कि डायलॉग्स के लेवल पे बहुत से नए लोग कोशिश करे जाएं। स्क्रीन पे के लेवल पे कई बार मुश्किल होता है क्योंकि आप डरे रहते हैं बहुत, लेकिन कई कोई सीनियर राइटर जैसे मुझे बताता है कि सुकेश मैंने इनके साथ काम किया है और ये बहुत अच्छा लिख रहे हैं, या वो खुद ले आते हैं अपनी टीम में, तो उस द्वारा मैंने मतलब वो सीनियर राइटर्स की तरफ से बहुत वो अटेम्प्ट देखा है जहाँ पे उनके साथ जब फ्रेश टैलेंट काम करता है तो उसमें हमें बहुत इजीली एक्सपोजर मिल जाता है कि हाँ यार ये बंदा देखो, ये राजू भाई इनके साथ काम कर रहे हैं, या पूर्णेंदु इनके साथ काम कर रहे हैं, या सत्यम इनका नाम ले रहे हैं, या अनुराधा तिवारी बोल रही हैं कि ये ठीक है, तो वो या राजेश दुबे बोल रहे हैं कि अच्छा है, तो फिर एकदम आपको वो ऑब्वियसली वो एंडोर्समेंट मिलने से बहुत कॉन्फिडेंस हम लोगों का बढ़ जाता है। नो सी दिस इज़ कम्प्लीटली केस ऑन केस। आप सिर्फ मैच्योरिटी से डील कर सकते हो इन चीज़ों को कि जहाँ पे आप लोगों को पार्टीज को बुला के पूछ सकते हो बहुत ही क्लियरली डिस्टिंक्टली कि भाई कौन सी चीज़। अब इनमें इनके राइट्स के लिए या इन पे क्लैरिटी के लिए आई वुड डेफिनेटली रिक्वेस्ट दैट कभी राइटर्स एसोसिएशन जो है और क्लैरिटी के साथ कि जब एक प्रोड्यूसर और राइटर काम करते हैं तो किस तरह का कॉन्ट्रैक्ट साइन करते हैं, क्या राइट्स होते हैं राइटर के, वो चीज़ों पे तो ऑब्वियसली आई वुड मतलब हमारी चीज़ों से ये हुआ है कि एक चीज़ जो मेरी कोशिश हमेशा रही है कि राइटर की पेमेंट कभी ना रुके। वो कई बार होता है कि सीनियर राइटर्स के साथ भी होता है कि प्रोड्यूसरों की पेमेंट, सपोज चैनल की पेमेंट कुछ डिले हो गई है या चैनल ने पेमेंट कर दी है बट प्रोड्यूसर जो है बड़ा बैडली डिसऑर्गेनाइज्ड था और उसने पेमेंट नहीं करी, तो वहाँ पे बीच में हमारे 2-3 अच्छे राइटरों को, काफ़ी सक्सेसफुल राइटरों को भी बहुत तकलीफ हुई बीच में, तो थोड़ा देर लगी लेकिन हमने चैनल से डायरेक्ट पेमेंट करवाई। लेकिन ऐसे बहुत क्लेम्स जो होते हैं वो आपको डरा भी देते हैं कई बार कि आजकल जैसे मेरा एक पैटर्न है, मैं बहुत क्लियरली उसी वक्त किसी भी राइटर या प्रोड्यूसर को कह देता हूँ कि जो शो पर पिच करने आए हैं, अगर उनके शो में मेरे शो से मेरे कोई सिमिलर जो मैं डेवलप कर रहा हूँ तो मैं उसी वक्त कह देता हूँ कि भैया जो आप सुना रहे हो वो आगे मत सुनाओ, ये सुनाना है तो ये क्लियरली समझो कि मैं ऑलरेडी इस चीज़ पे काम कर रहा हूँ। तो वो एक ऑनेस्टी मेरी और मेरी टीम की है कि हम अपफ्रंट पहले ही कह देते हैं कि भैया ये चीज़ जो आप कह रहे हो ये हम ऑलरेडी काम कर रहे हैं, तो आपको बाद में ना कोई गलतफहमी नहीं होनी चाहिए कि हमने ये करी है या नहीं करी। बाद में हम पलट के नहीं आपको कहेंगे 4 महीने बाद, हालांकि हो सकता है कि उसमें भी हमारी गलती ना हो, क्योंकि हम तो आई थिंक दैट इज अटेम्प्ट दैट वील ऑल हैव टू मेक as creative people, and obviously copyright laws and other things have to be strengthened so that the documentation that's happened, जब कोई चीज़ रजिस्टर होती है कहीं पे, वो डॉक्यूमेंटेशन में इतना दम होना चाहिए कि वो दिख सके कि भाई वो जो लिखा गया था और जो हम करने जा रहे हैं। अब मेरे को सडनली फिर सुबह होगी के लिए बहुत से लोगों ने आके बोला कि एक राइटर ने बोला कि ये तो मेरी फिल्म की स्टोरी है, पर हमारे पास तो वो कोई आई ही नहीं थी स्टोरी, वो जस्ट हैपेंड कि वो भी बेड़नी ट्राइब में कहीं पे सेट थी, बट उसमें कहीं पे भी सिर्फ ट्राइब को कॉमन रखना था, स्टोरी तो कुछ बिल्कुल कॉमन नहीं थी। तो सिर्फ ट्राइब पे मैं कोई बना रहा हूँ और आप बना रहे हो तो फिर थोड़ी वो सेम हो जाएगा। तो ऐसे बहुत से क्लेम्स होते हैं जो कई बार बहुत ही आउटरेजियसली बुरे होते हैं। Have forums with Writers Association to create a situation where a broadcaster representative is maybe called and this is discussed. I mean, I don't see any problem if it needs to be figured कि कहाँ से क्या चीज़ हुई होगी। I'd like, sir, I think the only word that I hope for and I'm able to associate with it in the next 2-3 decades, I mean, one is dreams about that, is to have a more strong forum at Film Writers End and some effort to, as I said, chronicle and teach that a Film Writers Association takes up gradually. I mean, it is able to, I mean, whether it's how does the body का जो business model है वो क्या है, body का वो तो मैं नहीं जानता, लेकिन मैं उम्मीद करूँगा कि कहीं हम लोग सब अपने इंडिविजुअल लोग तो खैर पता नहीं करेंगे, कोई विस्लिंग गुड होगा, कहीं कोई कुछ होगा, लेकिन जो कि अच्छा है, बहुत अच्छे अटेम्प्ट्स हैं, लेकिन जो लोग एक्चुअली में काम करते हैं और जिनके जो उन लोगों से कंट्रीब्यूशन लेना बहुत ज़रूरी है, एक्सपीरियंस का, मतलब जो लोग फिल्मों में बड़ा काम कर चुके हैं और टीवी में भी काम कर चुके हैं, उनके कंट्रीब्यूशन को किस तरह से वो वॉलंटरी हो इनवॉलंटरी हो वो तो मैं नहीं जानता, लेकिन उन लोगों को अपनी चीज़ें शेयर कर पाना अब किसी टीचिंग फॉर्म में वो बहुत ज़रूरी है, बिकॉज अदरवाइज हमारी इंडस्ट्री इवॉल्व नहीं होगी। हम अपने लेवल पे सिर्फ गलतियाँ कर कर के जो सीख रहे हैं वो तो अच्छी बात है, लेकिन how do you sort of see, of course you have to keep write till you know understand writing. जो लोग लिखते ज़्यादा हैं, इवन व्हेन दे आर राइटिंग स्क्रिप्ट जो कहीं नहीं जा रही हूँ, मैं उन राइटर्स की बहुत रिस्पेक्ट करता हूँ जो लोग लिखते रहते हैं, नहीं जा रही है टीवी पे, नहीं जा रही है फिल्म में, नहीं जा रही है, लेकिन उन लोगों का जिनका पैशन है कि भाई हम एक दिन अपना ग्रामर इवॉल्व कर लेंगे, एक दिन हमारी चीज़ बिक जाएगी, उन लोगों की तो मैं बहुत रिस्पेक्ट करता हूँ कि कई बार आप देखिए। लेकिन मेरा मतलब ये है कि जो एवोल्यूशन और ज़्यादा आ सकता है हमारे स्किल्स में, अगर राइटिंग जो है वो सिखाई जा सके या एटलीस्ट शेयर की जा सके टिप्स एट अ वेरी रेगुलर लेवल विद यंगर पीपल, तो उससे क्या होगा, एक तो यंगर लोगों को एक साइंटिफिक माध्यम से ढूंढने का भी जरिया इंडस्ट्री के लिए बहुत इजी होगा कि भाई जो यंग लोग जाएंगे किसी फोरम में और सीखेंगे या बात करेंगे, तो हमें पता भी तो चलेगा कि वो लोग हैं कौन, मतलब जो लोग इंडस्ट्री में आज हम लोग वी कैन मेक अ डिफरेंस जब तक हम इस कुर्सी पे हैं, या जब तक हम अपना जिस भी एक्सपीरियंस से जो लोग भी काम कर रहे हैं कॉन्स्टेंटली, दे विल ऑलवेज नीड न्यू पाइपलाइंस। वो न्यू पाइपलाइन कैसे आएगी ऊपर, अलग अलग प्रोडक्शन हाउसेस कई बार ढूंढते हैं, बालाजी करता है, बहुत कुछ और लोग करते हैं, लेकिन अपार्ट फ्रॉम दैट, फ्रॉम द मेन बॉडी and from people who are successful, writers who are successful, they will have to get together to groom people, is what I think, and find ways to, so that their exposure is sort of, so that their discovery is also facilitated and their evolution is also facilitated.